The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Angela Matthews welcomed a guest into her home in a peaceful Atlanta neighborhood on December 15, 2009. She ought to have turned away. No one in the close-knit community could have predicted the web of secrets that swiftly developed from what started as an innocent conversation with the neighbor's kid. Blood had been shed by the time the truth came to light, and a housewife's life would be turned into a warning story that would be discussed in whispers all around the neighborhood. Angela Angie Matthews, a 38-year-old woman of remarkable beauty, was married to Marcus Matthews, a prosperous businessman who was frequently away from home. On the surface, their marriage seemed ideal, a luxurious lifestyle, a nice home, and pricey cars. However, behind the surface, Angie sensed a void that money could not satisfy. Angie was attracted to her neighbor's 22-year-old son, Jamal Thompson, that afternoon, while Marcus was out on another business trip. Next door, Jamal had grown up, a young man with a bright future who was ambitious. Angie had seen him grow from a boy to a man over the years, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years when she was around his youthful charm and enthusiasm. It began rather casually. A grin, a sidelong glance, a light-hearted discussion at the fence between their residences. However, the attraction that had been simmering between them erupted on that December day. Jamal went to Angie's house pretending to assist her in repairing a broken tap. One thing paved the way for another. Before long, they were in each other's arms, having crossed a boundary they both knew was inappropriate. The excitement of the forbidden drove them to start their affair in secrecy. Angie used the seclusion of her house as a haven for their snatched moments together, inviting Jamal over whenever Marcus was away. Their interactions were made much more delicious by the thrill of skulking around and the fear of being discovered. No one would ever know, they told themselves, that they took the necessary precautions to conceal their secret. However, they were mistaken. The romance had been going on for almost 2 months by February 2, 2010. Jamal and Angie had grown bolder and more rash. The thrill was heightened by the fear of being discovered, which encouraged them to take further chances. They relied on Marcus's frequent absences to hide their tracks, meeting at strange times even throughout the day. Marcus was scheduled to attend a business meeting in Chicago that morning. As usual, Angie asked Jamal over, sure that she would have the day to herself. They lost themselves in the passion of their romance as they spent hours together. They were unaware, however, that Marcus had chosen to surprise his wife by arriving home early, after concluding his meeting early. Marcus pulled into the driveway around 2:45 p.m. Jamal and Angie were upstairs, not even realizing he was there. Marcus's voice reverberated through the silent hallways as he yelled for Angie as soon as he entered the house. When Angie heard his voice, her heart almost stopped. When she realized they were in danger, panic struck. She threw Jamal out of bed in a panic and told him to hide. Jamal barely had time to escape out the bedroom into the adjoining bathroom, half-dressed and scared. Unaware of the tension in the room, Marcus called Angie's name and headed upstairs. As she met Marcus in the corridor, Angie hastily composed herself and forced a smile. In the hopes that he wouldn't notice the messy bedroom behind her, she made up a story about napping. Exhausted from his journey, Marcus didn't ask her specifics. After giving her a cheek kiss, he went to the loo to change. When Angie realized that Jamal was still lurking inside, her heart began to race. But they had good fortune. Instead, Marcus chose to use the downstairs guest bathroom. Angie muttered for Jamal to go out the back door as soon as he was out of sight. Jamal managed to escape, just escaping detection, but the near miss left them both shaken. Angie realized they needed to use more caution after that day. The excitement remained, but it was now tinged with fear. However, neither of them could bring themselves to stop the affair, even if it was dangerous. The rush and the feelings they gave each other were what they were addicted to. Thus they persisted, holding increasingly covert meetings and acting more rashly. Their good fortune started to run out on February 20th, 2010. The elderly neighbor across the street, Mrs. Jenkins, had long been regarded as the busybody of the neighborhood. She was aware of everything that occurred on that block, and she had started to observe the odd arrivals and departures at the Matthews residence. She witnessed Jamal entering Angie's house covertly that afternoon, his eyes darting about as though he was terrified of being noticed. Suspicious by nature, Mrs. Jenkins observed from her window. She became curious. She casually shared what she had seen to another neighbor later that evening. In their close-knit community, rumors swiftly spread, and Jamal's mother, Patrice Thompson, soon heard them. The rumors worried Patrice, a devout mother who had great expectations for her kid. That evening, she went up to Jamal and demanded to know what was happening. Taken by surprise, Jamal denied everything. He maintained that there was no relationship between him and Angie, and that Mrs. Jenkins must have been misinformed. To Patrice, however, the doubt had already been sown. Although she had no evidence, just the word of an elderly woman who was notorious for gossiping, she didn't think her son was telling the whole truth. Jamal was afraid that his secret was no longer secure, even though he denied it. The affair, which had started out as an exciting escape, suddenly felt like a ticking time bomb that could blow up at any minute since the walls were closing in. However, neither Angie nor Jamal could have foreseen the extent of that explosion's devastation. The atmosphere in the Matthews house was tense on the evening of March 5th, 2010. For weeks, Angela Matthews struggled with remorse as the consequences of her affair with Jamal Thompson became unbearable. Knowing that a relationship with Jamal would only result in more problems, she had made the decision that it was time to break up. However, she was unaware of how volatile the situation would get when she got ready to tell him the news. Under the guise of a routine meeting, Angie called Jamal over at around 7 o'clock. However, instead of the passionate hug he had anticipated, Jamal was greeted by a solemn Angela. She informed him that they both needed to move on, and that their affair had to stop because it was getting too dangerous. Jamal, who had become more and more devoted to Angie, felt as though everything had fallen apart. He was hearing things he couldn't believe. Was she simply going to discard everything after everything they had experienced? Jamal's first astonishment soon gave way to rage. He accused Angie of manipulating his feelings and taking advantage of him. In an attempt to maintain her composure, Angie clarified that things weren't like that, but Jamal wasn't paying attention. His voice rose as he begged her not to terminate things, displaying his desperation. However, Angie persisted in telling him that it was finished and that he had to go. The dispute quickly became heated. Jamal grew more combative as a result of feeling cornered and rejected. As he kept pleading, he took Angie by the arm and drew her close. However, she withdrew, insisting that he go right away. Jamal pushed her away from him out of anger. Angie lost her footing and staggered back towards the stairs. It was slow motion for the following several seconds. It was too late when Jamal reached out to seize her. After losing her balance, Angie tumbled violently backward down the stairs, landing in a crumpled heap at the bottom. There was an uncanny silence in the home. Gazing down at Angie's lifeless body, Jamal stood motionless at the top of the steps, his heart thumping in his chest. When he realized what had happened, panic struck. Calling her name, he hurried down the stairs but got no answer. Angie was gone. Her eyes looking blankly ahead, her neck twisted at an odd angle. There was nothing he could do to stop her from dying from the fall. Jamal left Angie's body lying there and ran away in terror. His thoughts were racing with sorrow and panic as he hurried back to his own home. He had no idea where to go or what to do, but he knew he had to leave. His life was in ruins, and all he knew was that he had murdered the woman he professed to love. Marcus Matthews arrived home from another business trip the following morning, March 6, 2010. There was an eerie silence when he walked inside the house, instead of the familiar sight of Angie waiting for him. There was no response when he yelled her name. He felt a growing sense of dread as he made his way around the home. There was a problem. He didn't notice her until he got to the bottom of the steps. On the floor, Angie's body was still. Marcus could see right away that something was seriously wrong by the way her limbs spread out. He hurried to her side, anxiously feeling for a pulse, but she seemed cold to the touch, and his breath froze in his throat. He called 911 in a panic, his hands shaking as he attempted to describe what he had discovered. The paramedics and police came in a matter of minutes, swiftly verifying what Marcus already knew. Angie had passed away. One person maintained composure and attention among the chaos as officials started to evaluate the situation. Bryant, detective. Even though he was an experienced detective, there was something off about the scene that bothered him. Angie's injuries, the angle at which she fell, and her position all seemed too brutal and intentional to be the result of a normal accident. The inquiry into Angie's death started in earnest on March 8, 2010. When Marcus was questioned first, he was devastated. He talked about how happy and healthy Angie was in his most recent conversation with her. He was baffled by how this could have occurred. Marcus maintained that there were no significant issues in their marriage when the police asked him about it. He loved his wife, and the thought of someone hurting her was too much for him to handle. Mrs. Jenkins, who had always been willing to volunteer whatever information she had, was one of the neighbors the police spoke to while they canvassed the neighborhood. Mrs. Jenkins said to the authorities that she had observed Jamal and Angie visiting frequently. Several times, usually when Marcus was out of town, she had witnessed Jamal entering the Matthews home. Something was obviously happening between them, in her opinion. Detective Bryant was intrigued by this information. He started looking into Jamal and Angie's relationship more since he thought there might be more to it than first appeared. On March 12, 2010, Jamal was brought in for interrogation. He attempted to remain calm despite his nervousness and tenseness, but it was obvious that the pressure was wearing him down. He said he hadn't seen Angie in days and denied any role in her death. However, his alibi was at best tenuous, and his explanation didn't line up. Detective Bryant kept a tight eye on Jamal while he was being questioned. His anxious manner and the way he sidestepped several inquiries suggested that he had something to conceal. The detective believed that there was more to the story and was not persuaded by Jamal's protestations. Patrice Thompson's concerns grew as the investigation went on. She was the one who knew her son the best, and she could sense that he was struggling with something. Jamal remained silent despite her attempts to encourage him to talk to her and share what was happening. He was aware that the noose was drawing closer to him, and he was afraid. The breakthrough was made on March 20, 2010. After being painstakingly collected and examined, the scene's forensic evidence started to provide a more comprehensive picture of what had transpired that evening. Jamal's presence at the house was confirmed by the discovery of his fingerprints on the stair railing. However, text messages found on Angie's phone provided the most incriminating proof. She and Jamal exchanged messages that disclosed the nature of their connection and the disagreement they had the night before she passed away. The cops had enough proof to proceed with this fresh evidence. That afternoon, Jamal was taken into custody at his house, and as he was handcuffed and taken away, the seriousness of the situation really set in. He was suspected of killing Angie in the heat of the moment and was charged with second-degree murder. The truth of what Jamal had done started to sink in as he was placed under arrest. Everything had been ruined by the affair that had previously been a source of passion and excitement. Jamal faced a future in prison, Marcus was left to mourn the death of his wife, and Angie was dead. The announcement caused a flurry of activity in the neighborhood, with rumors that had begun months earlier now intensifying. The repercussions were disastrous, as the secrets that had been kept behind closed doors were suddenly exposed to the public. By April 15, 2010, the Matthews Thompson trial was a hot topic in Atlanta. It was more than simply another case. It was the sort of tale that was discussed in whispers on front porches and in grocery store lines. A scandal that shook a close-knit black neighborhood involved a housewife, her young boyfriend, and a tragic death. People were crammed into the courthouse that day, curious to see what would happen. Under the aggressive and unyielding leadership of Assistant District Attorney Carla Henderson, The prosecution made a good showing. She began by outlining the facts and the sequence of events that resulted in Angela's demise. Forensic evidence, such as Jamal's fingerprints on the stair railing, the text messages he exchanged with Angie, and the bruises on her arms that suggested a fight, formed the basis of the prosecution's case. Henderson portrayed a young man who was unable to cope with rejection, who allowed his rage to control him, and who ultimately killed a lady he professed to love. One by one, the neighbors testified on April 16, 2010, sharing their observations and conversations over the months preceding Angie's passing. First up was Mrs. Jenkins, who spoke steadily as she related how she frequently saw Jamal slipping into the Matthews home late at night while Marcus was out. Everyone had heard the rumors that had been going around the neighborhood, but nobody wanted to believe them, she said. The prosecution's claim that the affair had been a well-known secret was further supported by her devastating testimony. On April 18, 2010, Marcus Matthews provided testimony. With a broken heart, still reeling from the loss of his wife, he proceeded to the stand. His voice faltered as he talked, but he maintained his composure. He discussed how his marriage to Angie had started out well but had gradually begun to deteriorate. He acknowledged that they were no longer as close as they once were, that he had been working more and more, and that they had become more aloof. Despite their marital problems, Marcus maintained that he was unaware of Angie's affair until the police investigation started. He talked about how much he loved his wife, how shocked he was to discover her dead, and how devastated he was to lose her in such a terrible way. Under the leadership of lawyer Jonathan Reed, the defense contended that while the affair was a terrible error, it was not a crime. Jamal's mother, Patrice Thompson, testified on her son's behalf on April 20, 2010. Despite her pride and strength, she was clearly shaken as she sat in front of the jury. She spoke tearfully as she characterized Jamal as a good youngster who had never been in trouble. She described how difficult it was for him to grow up without a father, and how she had tried her best to raise him properly. Patrice begged the jury to view her son as a young man who had committed a grave error in a fit of rage and bewilderment, rather than as a criminal. The defense argued that Angie's death was an accident rather than murder on April 23, 2010. Reed said that the fall was a tragic outcome of a furious quarrel that went out of hand, and that Jamal had never meant to hurt her. He emphasized that Jamal had not planned any of it, that he had been devastated by what had transpired, and that he had attempted to prevent her from falling. However, the prosecution remained unmoved, claiming that the evidence demonstrated a crime of passion motivated by desperation and jealousy. On May 10, 2010, following weeks of testimony and discussion, the jury returned a verdict. As everyone awaited the verdict, the courtroom was anxious. Jamal Thompson was convicted of involuntary manslaughter by the jury. Even though the crime was not as serious as the second-degree murder he had been charged with at first, it nevertheless carried a heavy penalty. Jamal received a 15-year prison sentence with a 10-year parole potential. Patrice sobbed as the punishment was read, her sobs reverberating across the courtroom. With the consequences of his conduct and his loss of freedom bearing down on him, Jamal, now bound, hung his head. For all those concerned, the trial's aftermath was heartbreaking. Marcus Matthews made the tough choice to sell the home he and Angie had shared for so many years on June 5, 2010. He couldn't handle the memories any longer. The catastrophe that had rocked his life, the disputes, the laughs. He was unable to remain in the neighborhood where he was well known, and where he was constantly followed around by pitying looks and murmurs. In an attempt to find some quiet and start over somewhere where no one knew his name, Marcus packed up his things and left. Patrice suffered 2 losses. In addition to losing her son to the criminal justice system, she also lost the privacy and respect she had valued. As she grew more withdrawn and the burden of Jamal's deeds weighed heavily on her heart, her once active involvement in the community diminished. Unsure of what to say, the neighbors who had earlier given her a warm greeting now avoided making eye contact. The scandal left the lively, close-knit town shattered and served as a continual reminder of how easily things may go wrong. In the end, The purported secret passion turned into a lethal addiction. But this is nothing compared to the terrible drama that resulted from the housewife's affair with the neighbor's daughter. Watch and subscribe for more of the never-ending family and neighborhood turmoil.